The break room smelled like burnt coffee and corporate optimism, the kind that comes in a motivational poster and leaves with your pension. I've been with Hartwell Logistics for 22 years. 22 years of peak seasons, late nights, and every Black Friday that nearly broke us, but didn't. Because I made sure it didn't. My title was Director of Supply Chain Operations. But what I actually did was hold the whole machine together with institutional knowledge, personal relationships with carriers, and a phone full of contacts that took 2 decades to build. My name is not important to this story. What's important is what I did for that company and what they decided that was worth. The answer, it turned out, was nothing. My boss's nephew, I should say, arrived in March. His name was Colt, 29 years old, MBA from a school that sent a lot of emails about its ranking. He wore slim-fit shirts and used the word scalable the way some people use punctuation. He came in as my co-director, which everyone in the building understood to mean my replacement on a delay. My boss, the VP of Operations, a man I'd worked beside for 11 years, had the decency to look uncomfortable when he introduced us. Colt did not. He shook my hand like he was already doing me a favor. "I've heard a lot about you," he said. "Good things, I hope," I said. He smiled the way people smile when they don't actually answer questions. "We're going to do great things together." I nodded. I'd been around long enough to know what together meant in that sentence. For 3 months, I trained him. I showed him our carrier network, 47 contracted partners, each with their own quirks, their own preferred contacts, their own informal agreements that existed nowhere in writing because they'd been built on handshakes and years of reliability. I walked him through our warehouse routing logic, our escalation protocols, the backup arrangements we kept quiet but ready for when weather or labor disruptions hit the southeast corridor. He took notes on an iPad. He asked smart-sounding questions. He never asked the ones that mattered. I noticed he wasn't writing down names, just systems, just processes. As if the whole operation ran on software and not on people who answered their phones at 2 in the morning because I'd answered mine for them first. In June, my boss called me into his office and closed the door. He had the look of a man delivering news he didn't write. "The company is restructuring," he said. "Streamlining leadership layers." "How many layers?" I asked. He didn't answer that directly. He said my role was being consolidated. He said my experience was invaluable, that word that companies use right before they decide not to pay for it anymore. He said there would be a severance package, generous by any standard. I was 54 years old. I had a mortgage I'd almost paid off and a daughter starting her 2nd year of college in the fall. "When?" I asked. "End of the month," he said. He looked out the window when he said it. I thanked him. I shook his hand. I walked back to my office, sat down at my desk, and looked at 22 years of a career organized into a room that wasn't mine anymore. Then I got to work. I want to be clear about what I did next, because it matters. I did not sabotage anything. I did not hide information or leave gaps or quietly let things slide. I spent my last 3 weeks documenting everything, and I mean everything. Every carrier contact, every informal agreement, every seasonal adjustment we made that wasn't in any official manual because I'd kept it in my head out of habit. I wrote it all down. I created a transition document so thorough that my assistant later told me it printed out to 240 pages. I did this because it was my job. I did this because I'm not built the other way. But I also made copies of everything before I handed it over. Not to use, just to have. 22 years of institutional memory doesn't just belong to them. Some of it is mine. My last day was a Friday. Colt walked me to the elevator. He thanked me. He said the team was in good hands. I looked at him and I genuinely hoped he was right. The elevator doors closed. I drove home. I mowed the lawn. I made dinner. I did not think about what was going to happen next because I had done my part, and whatever happened next was not my problem anymore. That lasted about 6 weeks. My wife and I have a habit on Saturday mornings. Coffee on the back porch, no phones. Whatever's left of the week gets talked through and set down. It was one of those mornings in late August when she asked me, quietly, if I was doing all right. "I'm fine," I said. She looked at me the way she's looked at me for 31 years. "You've checked your email 4 times since we sat down." I put the phone face down on the table. "Old habits," I said. She didn't push it. She just reached over and put her hand on mine, and we sat there listening to the birds in the yard. and for a few minutes I was actually fine. Then my phone started ringing. Not a text, a call, then another. Then my old work cell, which I still had because no one had asked for it back, started buzzing on the table where I'd set it down next to my coffee. I didn't answer either one. By noon, I had 31 missed calls across both phones. By 3 o'clock, 46. By the time my daughter called to check in from school and I finally spoke to another human being, the count was somewhere past 60. I sat on the back steps and scrolled through the names. My former boss, Colt. 4 different numbers. I recognized as warehouse managers. 2 I didn't recognize at all. 3 from carriers. 1 from a woman named Dolores at our primary Southeast partner who'd been moving our freight since before Colt was old enough to drive. I did not call any of them back. I made a sandwich. I watched a baseball game. I went to bed at 10 o'clock and slept 8 hours. I found out later what had happened. Not because I asked, but because Dolores called me on a Tuesday afternoon, not in a panic this time, just to talk. She and I had worked together for 16 years. She'd send flowers when my father passed. That kind of relationship. She told me that the previous Friday, Labor Day weekend, the beginning of the first real push toward the fall shipping season, 3 of our major carriers had simultaneously flagged payment discrepancies. Not small ones. Hartwell's accounts payable had been running a new automated system that Colt had championed in his first month, meant to replace the manual verification process I'd used for years. The system had misfiled carrier classifications during a software update, which triggered automatic payment holds on 41 active shipments across the Southeast corridor. 41 shipments. Labor Day weekend. 2 of them perishable freight. Colt had called the carrier contacts in the system. Most of them were wrong. Outdated numbers, people who'd moved on. One that rang to a fax machine. He didn't have Dolores' cell phone. He didn't have the regional dispatcher at our backup carrier in Chattanooga who would have rerouted half of it in an hour if someone had just asked nicely and mentioned my name. He had the system. The system didn't know any of that. How bad? I asked her. She was quiet for a moment. 2 clients escalated formally. One of them, the grocery chain out of Birmingham. They're talking about breach of contract. I closed my eyes. I'm sorry, Dolores, I said. Don't you apologize to me, she said. You built something that worked. They just didn't understand what they had. We talked for another half hour about nothing in particular. Her grandkids. My daughter's fall semester. The way the summer had gone too fast. When we hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. I thought about calling my boss, not to offer help, just to see, to understand. I didn't. 3 weeks later, I got a call from an attorney. Not Hartwell's attorney, a labor attorney named Patricia Chen, who represented a group of 7 former Hartwell employees, all over 50, all eliminated in the same restructuring wave that had taken me out. She had found me through my LinkedIn profile, which I hadn't updated in months. She explained the situation carefully. The 7 clients she represented had filed an age discrimination complaint with the EEOC. During discovery, they'd found a pattern. Every director-level position eliminated in the restructuring had been held by someone over 50. Every replacement was under 35. The exceptions, and there were some, had documentation that looked, she said, like it had been written to justify decisions already made. We're not asking you to join the lawsuit, she said. We're asking if you'd be willing to speak to what you witnessed during the transition period, your training of your replacement, the process. What was documented and what wasn't? Is this a deposition? I asked. It could become one, she said. Right now, it's a conversation. I thought about my last 3 weeks at Hartwell. I thought about the 240 pages I'd written. I thought about Colt not writing down names. I thought about a fax machine ringing somewhere in a building while 41 shipments sat on loading docks over Labor Day weekend. Send me what you need me to review, I said. I'll take a look. What I had, it turned out, was useful. Not just the transition document. The copies I'd kept of internal emails, standard practice for anyone who's been in corporate long enough to know that paper trails matter, showed a timeline that Patricia described as clarifying. The restructuring plan had been drafted 4 months before it was announced. My replacement had been identified before my performance review was conducted. The review, which I'd received 2 weeks before termination and which rated me as meets expectations, had been edited 3 times in the system. The original version had rated me exceeds. I hadn't known that last part. Patricia's team found it in discovery. I sat with that for a while. 22 years. and someone had gone back and changed a document to make the math work. I want to tell you about the morning I gave my deposition, because it was not what I expected. I expected to feel something, anger maybe, or the satisfaction of finally saying out loud what had been done. I dressed in the suit I wear to my daughter's school events. My wife made me breakfast. She hugged me at the door and told me to just tell the truth, which had always been her advice for everything and was always correct. The conference room was on the 14th floor of a building downtown with a view of the river. Hartwell's attorneys were there, two of them, young, with matching expressions of careful neutrality. Patricia sat across from them. A court reporter set up her machine in the corner. For 4 hours, I answered questions. I described the training process. I described what I handed over and what I observed was not retained. I described the carrier network and why personal relationships were the foundation of it, and why that could not be documented in a way that survived the person who built it. I described the emails I'd kept. I described the performance review I had received and compared it, when asked, to the one Patricia showed me, the original, which I had never seen before. Hartwell's attorneys asked me at one point whether I had felt the transition was handled professionally. I thought about that for a moment. I handled my part professionally, I said. I can only speak to my part. One of them wrote something down. When it was over, Patricia walked me to the elevator. She told me I'd done well. She told me the case was strong. What happens to the company? I asked. That's not really the goal, she said. The goal's accountability for the people it happened to. But what happens? I asked again. She considered this. The Birmingham client filed breach of contract last month. The EEOC complaint creates additional exposure. There are board members paying attention now who weren't before. The elevator arrived. I heard Colt resigned, I said. 2 weeks ago, she said. Quietly? I nodded. I rode down 14 floors. I walked out into a clear fall morning with the river on my left and the sound of the city going about its business, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction exactly. Not relief. Something quieter than either of those. Something like when a long job is finally done and done correctly and you can set it down. My wife had lunch waiting when I got home. Soup she'd made from scratch, which she only does when she thinks I need it. We ate at the kitchen table with the back door open and the dog asleep in the yard. How do you feel? She asked. I thought about it honestly. Like I did my job, I said. She smiled at that. She's always understood what that means to me. Maybe better than I have. I've been consulting since September. 3 clients so far, all mid-sized logistics operations that need someone to tell them what they actually have before they accidentally throw it away. The work is good, the hours are mine. My daughter made the dean's list her sophomore year. We went out to celebrate with a dinner that cost more than it should have and was worth every cent. Last month, I ran into Dolores at an industry conference in Nashville. We had coffee and talked for 2 hours. She told me her company had just signed a new contract, one that used to belong to Hartwell. I didn't ask how Hartwell was doing. It wasn't my operation anymore. There's a thing that happens when you've been somewhere long enough to become the infrastructure. You stop being a person to the institution and start being a system. Reliable, invisible, taken for granted in the way that load-bearing walls are taken for granted. Nobody thinks about them until something shifts. What I know now, and what I'd tell anyone sitting where I sat 3 years ago, document everything. Not to protect yourself from them, to protect what you built from being lost. Your knowledge has weight. Your relationships have value. The work you did is real, even when the people who benefited from it decide it isn't. And keep your copies. The work matters. The people who see that will find you. The ones who don't, well, they'll figure it out eventually. Sometimes in the middle of a Labor Day weekend with 41 shipments sitting still and Dolores's phone ringing and nobody on the other end who knows what to say. But that wasn't my problem anymore, and that, in the end, was the whole point.